Resident Evil remakes are winning. They're winning awards, they're breaking sales records, they're dominating YouTube thumbnails, and yet something about them feels unsettling, and not in the way survival horror is supposed to feel. Because while everyone is busy praising how polished these games are, almost no one is asking the harder question. Are Resident Evil remakes actually preserving what made these games iconic? Or are they quietly rewriting the franchise's identity in the process? This isn't a nostalgia rant, this isn't remake hate, this is about something deeper, because when a remake becomes too good, it doesn't just honor the original, it replaces it. Now let's get this out of the way immediately. Capcom absolutely nailed these remakes. Resident Evil 2 Remake is widely considered one of the best remakes ever made, not just in horror, but in gaming history. They didn't just upscale textures or smooth animations, they rebuilt the game from the ground up. The RPD went from a static maze into a dynamic interconnected space that rewarded memory, backtracking, and risk assessment. Lighting wasn't just aesthetic, it controlled information. And sound wasn't just atmosphere, it became a threat indicator. In the original RE2, Mr. X was scripted. In the remake, he was systemic. He wasn't scary because he looked intimidating. He was scary because he didn't stop. Footsteps echoed through hallways, walls no longer felt safe. The RDP stopped being a puzzle and started feeling like a prison. Resident Evil 4 Remake took an even bigger risk. They touched a game that many people considered untouchable, and instead of remaking it shot for shot, Capcom recontextualized it. Leon became more grounded, enemies became more aggressive, and combat demanded positioning instead of brute force. Ashley became a real character instead of an escort mission meme. From a technical design and production standpoint, these games are a masterclass, which makes this next part uncomfortable for most fans. Classic Resident Evil wasn't scary because of gore or monsters. It was scary because the game didn't trust you. You didn't have enough ammo, you didn't move smoothly, you didn't always see the threat. Fixed camera angles weren't cinematic flair, they were psychological weapons. You entered rooms blind, you heard sounds before you saw enemies, and sometimes the camera refused to show you what was attacking you at all. Tank controls weren't bad design, they were part of the tension. Turning around took effort. Escaping mistakes wasn't guaranteed, and every encounter felt like a gamble. The modern remakes remove many of those restrictions, and intentionally so. Movement is fluid, aiming is precise, and the enemies telegraph attacks clearly. This fundamentally changes the type of fear being experienced. In the Resident Evil 2 remake, fear peaks early. The first hours are brutal, resources are scarce, enemies feel unstoppable, and Mr. X dominates the experience. But something happens halfway through. The players adapt. They learn optimal routes, they memorize spawns, and you can understand how the systems work. The fear gives way to efficiency. You're no longer surviving, you're managing. And in Resident Evil 4 Remake, the design philosophy shifts even further. This isn't about helplessness anymore, it's about pressure. The enemies overwhelm you in numbers, the combat arenas collapse inward, and the tension comes from chaos, not uncertainty. You're rarely confused, you're rarely powerless, and you're stressed but capable, and that's a massive tonal shift. Classic Resident Evil made you feel like a civilian trapped in a nightmare. Modern Resident Evil makes you feel like a trained operative under siege. Both are effective, but they are not the same horror. Here's where things get dangerous for the franchise. For a growing audience, the remakes is the first experience. They didn't play the original RE2, they didn't struggle with fixed cameras, they didn't experience fear through awkwardness. Their baseline expectation of Resident Evil is now third-person over-the-shoulder camera work, responsive gunplay, cinematic pacing, and highly polished systems. All of this means the franchise's identity is quietly shifting, and it's not because Capcom is careless, it's because they're successful. The remakes don't just modernize Resident Evil, they redefine them, and once that definition sticks, it becomes the new blueprint. There's something the originals had that the remakes struggle to recreate, and that's uncertainty. Not scripted uncertainty, and not jump scares, but existential uncertainty. You didn't know if fighting was the right choice. You didn't know if saving ammo now would kill you later. And you didn't know if you were even playing correctly. The modern games, especially the polished ones, subtly reassure players. They teach you through feedback. They reward skill expression. And they encourage mastery. Classic Resident Evil discouraged mastery. It wanted you uncomfortable. And the more refined the remakes become, the harder it is to preserve that feeling. This is the paradox Capcom now faces. The remakes are too good. They're smoother, they're cleaner, and they're more approachable. And because of that, the originals feel archaic by comparison. Not because they were poorly designed, but because they were designed for fear first and comfort last. So are the Resident Evil remakes elevating the originals? Of course they are. This is completely without question. But Resident Evil remakes also dilute the originals because they change what the player is being rewarded for. Classic Resident Evil rewards restraint. You were rewarded for not shooting, for running instead of fighting, and for leaving enemies alive because killing them was too expensive and the anticipated future consequences would leave a toll on your game. Progress wasn't about skill, it was about judgment. Modern remakes reward engagement, better aim is rewarded, and more aggressive gameplay is rewarded. Enemy encounters are designed to be solved, not avoided. Even when resources are limited, the systems quietly encourage interaction rather than avoidance. And that changes the emotional contract between the game and the player. In the originals, the game punished confidence. In the remakes, the game cultivates it. In classic Resident Evil, success often felt accidental. You survived because you made the least bad choice, not the best one. You didn't feel clever, you felt lucky. Modern remakes replace that feeling with something cleaner. You survived because you played well, because you aimed well, because you understood the mechanics. Fear is no longer rooted in ignorance, it's rooted in execution. That's the dilution. Not because execution-based horror is bad, but because it's a different genre philosophy entirely. When a franchise trains players to associate success with mastery, it becomes nearly impossible to return to vulnerability. Future entries must escalate with more enemies, more spectacle, more systems, and more mechanical depth. But escalation doesn't deepen fear, it only stabilizes it. The originals thrived on instability, on doubt, on inefficiency, and on discomfort. The remakes replace instability with reliability, and reliability is the enemy of horror. The scariest part isn't that the originals are being outshined, it's that their design language is becoming untranslatable. Fixed cameras feel wrong now. Limited movement feels broken, and unclear information feels unfair. Not because players are wrong, but because they've been conditioned differently. The remakes don't erase the originals, they teach players how to misread them. So yes, the remakes elevate Resident Evil technically, commercially, and culturally, but they dilute it philosophically. They move the franchise away from fear as a consequence of limitation, and toward fear as a byproduct of spectacle. That's not evolution, that's substitution. And for all of you who stayed until the end, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'll catch you in the next one.